Up the airy mountain, down the rushy glen, we daren't go a-hunting for fear of little men. We folk, good folk, trooping all together, green jacket, red cap, and white owl's feather. By the craggy hillside, through the mosses bare, they have planted thorn trees for pleasure here and there. Is any man so daring as dig them up in spite? He shall find their sharpest thorns in his bed at night. Up the airy mountain, down the rushy glen, we daren't go a-hunting for fear of little men. Hello, welcome to the History and Folklore podcast, where we look at different folk beliefs through history and how these beliefs have shaped people's perceptions of nature. Today we're looking at hawthorn trees and the folklore associated with them. Hawthorn has been in the British Isles for over 20,000 years and is only one of 33 trees that are native to Britain. Probably because of this, it has a central place in British folklore and is seen as a sacred tree to be respected. One of the strongest associations that hawthorns have is with spring, particularly May Day. As part of the May festivities, on the night before May the 1st, young people would go into the woods and return with hawthorn blossoms, stems and branches to turn into garlands and May trees, which were hawthorn branches set up outside the house and decorated with wild flowers. Crosses made of hawthorn would also be hung over the home and stable doors to protect the inhabitants, and in Suffolk any servant who was able to bring a branch of hawthorn back on May morning was rewarded with a bowl of cream for their efforts. Hawthorn was such a sign of the change of the seasons that was actually used as a way of measuring time in some parts of the British Isles. For example, in Scotland, farmers would say that harvest follows 13 weeks after hawthorn scents the air. The use of hawthorn at May Day celebrations became less common after the change from the Julian calendar to the Gregorian calendar in 1752. This is because May Day was shifted to be about 2 weeks earlier, making hawthorn blossoms difficult to find. Despite this, the tree still has a strong association with spring and is still called the May tree in some parts of Britain. It is probably unsurprising that due to its link with spring and new life, hawthorn has a number of positive associations. In Europe, hawthorn symbolises hope, marriage and fertility. In England, it is often incorporated into the green man figure, and in ancient Greece, brides would carry hawthorn boughs and wear the blossoms in their clothes. In medieval literature, hawthorn was used regularly to allude to courtship, fertility and carnal love. After the Enclosure Act in England, which saw common land being divided up into smaller private fields, hawthorn was used as a common hedging plant and also became associated with boundaries and protection. Planting hawthorn in your garden was said to keep witches away from your home, or at least severely diminish their power. Including hawthorn in hedging plants was also said to ward away fairies, and any cattle kept in the field would flourish. Similarly, May blossom placed in the cowshed door on May morning would ensure the milk supply for the coming year. In Cambridgeshire, hawthorn was also thought to bring luck to the harvest, and a branch would be added to the last hayrick. The protective nature of hawthorn extended to the point where it was said that a sprig of it in a hat would protect the wearer from lightning strike. However, there was definitely a darker side to hawthorn in folk practice and belief. A popular saying that references the tree states that hawthorn bloom and elder flower fill the house with evil power, and if hawthorn was brought inside the house, then a person inside was likely to die. In certain areas, the death would be pretty specific, with children being told that bringing hawthorn into the house would kill their mothers. An early version of "Don't Step on the Cracks or You'll Break Your Mother's Back" rhyme that's sung by school children in England today. But like all good rules, there are exceptions, and in Staffordshire, brought into the house if it was gathered on Holy Thursday and laid in the rafters by somebody who was not part of the family. In that case, it would protect the house from lightning strike because apparently, under a thorn, our Saviour was born. This superstition may have arisen from the fact that, apparently, the blossoms smelt like death, or more precisely, like the plague. This comparison goes back to before the Great Plague of 1665, and Francis Bacon refers to it in 1627 as an already existing piece of knowledge. The flowers do decay quickly once picked and let off a strong smell. It turns out that the comparison is actually quite accurate, as trimethylamine, sorry if I haven't pronounced that properly, I am definitely not a science person. If you know how it should be pronounced, please do let me know. Anyway, trimethylamine is one of the first products formed when animal tissues start to decay. And this is also present in hawthorn flowers. So if you want a budget interactive history experience, pick some May blossom and you can transport yourself to a 17th century house afflicted by the plague. There is a clear difference in historical attitude between hedgerow hawthorns planted by humans and lone hawthorn trees, sometimes called century trees, which were said to either be planted and inhabited by fairies or to have sprung from the ashes of the dead scattered through the world. In England, these solitary thorns were often used to mark places of administrative meetings or trials. The inclusion of thorn in an English place name is assumed to be evidence that such meeting trees once stood there as a place of administration and justice. However, in Ireland, a sentry thorn was a fairy trysting place. It was reported that a woman wearing white could sometimes be seen entering and leaving a lone hawthorn tree, and fairies would be seen in their branches. It is thought that this woman could be a fairy queen or potentially a banshee. Their association with death and the scattered ashes of the dead is quite interesting in this instance, as there are cases in Icelandic and Scandinavian folklore associating elves with the reincarnated souls of the dead. This makes me wonder if a similar belief used to exist in Ireland and other Celtic nations, or if it's just a coincidence. Because of their association with fairies, lone hawthorn trees demanded great respect and were especially dangerous on May Day, Midsummer or Halloween, the times of greatest fairy power. It was particularly unlucky to go to sleep under one of these thorns, and Thomas the Rhymer was said to have met the fairy of Elfheim after falling asleep under one, and was taken to the realm of the fairies for 7 years, at the end of which he was returned with the gift of prophecy. While this may have sounded like a great outcome, there were also stories of people not returning until their friends, families and all who knew them had died, so you may not want to take your chances. Farmers would cultivate around lone thorns that lay in their fields, and as late as 1968 there was local opposition to plans to remove a thorn that lay in the way of a road in Donegal. In the end, the road was realigned at great expense to avoid the tree. Again, this mimics legends in Iceland of elf stones, with roads being diverted even now to avoid rocks where elves are said to reside. Damaging one of these thorns was seen as incredibly reckless. A farmer in Worcester became so annoyed at the people coming to his land to visit the thorn that stood there that he chopped it down. Shortly after, he broke an arm, a leg, and then his farm burnt down. Another man reported that he saw blood coming from the tree as he tried to fell it, and so stopped, which he was probably grateful of, to be fair, if he ever found out the fate of the first farmer. Again, there is evidence of ritual rule-breaking in these instances, and saying a prayer before felling the thorn may save you from harm. This would only work if the reason for felling is absolutely necessary though, usually for ritual or healing purposes, never to tidy a farm or for convenience. One of the more alarming stories was when Walter Grove, son of a manor house in Dorset, cut down a thorn when firewood ran short one winter. After this, the entire village became infertile. No chickens laid eggs, no calves, and no babies were conceived. It was only after the tree was replaced that this was remedied and things returned to normal, but it shows how an entire community could be punished for the thoughtlessness of one individual. Fairy or sentry thorns did not always bring ill fortune though, if you treated the tree and the fairies with the respect that they deserved. An account of 2 men who carefully ploughed a field, taking great care to avoid the hawthorn tree in the middle, were rewarded at the end of their work with a table overflowing with food and drink. A particularly lovely story from the Isle of Man tells of a girl who had always left offerings out for the local fairies. When she needed help completing her spinning work in time, she told a nearby hawthorn of her troubles, and the fairies came to complete her work, as well as leaving her a beautiful shawl of wildflowers as a parting gift. In England, this is particularly true in the case of the Glastonbury thorn in Somerset. After conversion, a legend grew around the tree that said it came into being after St. Joseph of Arimathea struck his staff into the ground, where it immediately rooted and grew branches to the amazement of the watching crowd. This miracle gave people a justifiable reason to continue venerating the tree after conversion, and it was said that the tree would burst into bloom every year on December the 25th to celebrate the birth of Christ. In the winter of 1752, after the calendar change, the tree failed to do this, and apparently a large crowd gathered around it on January the 5th, Christmas Day in the old calendar, to see if it bloomed then. It did, which was seen as proof that the old calendar was the correct one. Sadly, the Glastonbury thorn was cut down by Cromwellian troops, who saw it as a relic of old superstitions in the English Civil War. It was later replaced by another, said to be from a cutting of the original tree. The importance of hawthorns easily passed from pagan to Christian belief after conversion. In the first episode of this podcast, about elves, I talk about how the early Christian church was keen to keep the trappings of old religions and folk beliefs, while changing the meaning for them to a more Christian one, so as to ease the transition between the religions. Other lone thorns retained importance to their local communities in their own ways. In Ireland, some became mass trees, were dedicated to saints, or associated with holy wells, or incorporated into burial customs. In France, hawthorns were seen as an acceptable alternative to church to pray if someone was a long way from the church building, and it was traditional for mothers to pray at these trees for the health of their children. Hawthorn wood was seen as particularly holy, as it was said to be the wood that Jesus' crown of thorns was made out of. In the medieval era, rosaries were often made out of hawthorn because of this. It was believed that this link made hawthorn particularly effective in healing. A charm for a festering wound instructed the practitioner to pass a thorn over the wound while saying the phrase, "Christ was of the Virgin born, he was pricked by a thorn. It never did bell and swell, I trust in Jesus, it never will." Hawthorn was seen to have a number of other healing properties, and in the 17th century the herbalist Thomas Culpeper claimed it was a singular remedy for kidney stones and dropsy, which caused tissue swelling. It is still used in modern medicine to treat a variety of ailments including high or low blood pressure, congestive heart failure, which can lead to edema, formerly known as dropsy, and high cholesterol. As well as medicinal uses, hawthorn berries and leaves have been used for food for thousands of years, either straight from the tree or made into jams and jellies. The leaves were often called poor man's bread and cheese due to their distinctive taste. If you do choose to try some, obviously make sure it is definitely hawthorn and safe to eat, but maybe also leave an offering out in return for the fairies that live there, just in case. Thank you for listening to this episode of the History and Folklore podcast. If you enjoyed the episode, I would really appreciate it if you could follow me on Facebook at History and Folklore Podcast or Instagram at History and Folklore, where you'll be notified of future episodes and also discover lots of random history and folklore facts. You can also get in touch by emailing me at historyandfolklorepodcast@gmail.com. Thank you again for listening, and I hope to see you for the next episode.